welcome everyone to this event tonight. Morgan Jerkins and Alice Hasters speaking for the next hour. We're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you all for being here. My name is Benjamin Bergner. I'm the program officer at 1014. We are one of the partners here, together with the Goethe-Institut and the Thomas Mann House, who make this event possible. The director of the Goethe-Institut, Jörg Schumacher, he cannot be here tonight, so please excuse him, but he's tuning in online. This event is presented by the Goethe-Institut here at their wonderful library and multifunctional space in New York City. We have the pleasure of being here, and the library, if you don't have a card yet, please sign up for one. You can actually borrow Alice's book that stands right there. And I think they also have the audio book that you narrate. I listened to that one. They also offer language courses here and lots of cultural events, so if you're not on the newsletter list yet, please sign up. Then also a big shout out to the Thomas Mann House that supports Alice Hasters being here. She's currently participating in their fellowship program in Los Angeles. For those of you who haven't heard of it before, the Thomas Mann House is a fellowship program run by the Federal Republic of Germany through the Thomas Mann and Villa Aurora Foundation, I think. And they strive to create a vibrant and transatlantic space for debate where intellectuals and great thinkers come and exchange ideas among themselves, and then also with like-minded people here in the United States. And similar to the Thomas Mann House, here in New York City, 1014 is an organization that is just being set up in the former Goethe House on Fifth Avenue, 1014 Fifth Avenue, just across the street from the Metropolitan Museum. That building will still be renovated and be turned into a fellowship program as well. But we're really happy to be partnering on this, and you can also join us for events in spring and then in fall later this year. Before I introduce our two speakers for tonight, let me just say what's going to happen over the next roughly an hour. We will have a conversation by Alice and Morgan, and then afterwards you can ask questions. So if you do have a question, please keep it in the back of your mind. I will come to you with the microphone later on, and speaking with the microphone is essential because we're also live streaming this. Only with the microphone, people in the live stream can hear us. If you are tuned in via the live stream, you can also write a question into the chat, and we are hoping to be able to take one or two of those questions later on. After the Q&A, only for those of you who are here in the space, there will be a reception, and we hope that you can join us. So thank you for joining us. Alice Hasters, she's a journalist, author, and podcaster. Alice has been producing the podcast Feuer und Brot. If you speak German, please listen in. You've been doing it since 2016, together with Maximiliane Hecke. Alice is also the author of a great book about being black in Germany, and with that book pointing out what white Germans can really learn and what they've been doing wrong. It's also about coloniality, about othering, and I want to encourage everybody to read it. Morgan is a New York Times best-selling author. Her book...
Ascending, I was like, ooh, nice.
Yeah, it's got a good ring to it. You've written several books. One is This Will Be My Undoing, Living at the Intersection of Black Female and Feminist in White America. And that's also partly of what we'll talk about. You're an acclaimed writer. You've been written short pieces for The New Yorker and for Elle, for The Guardian, for The New York Times, The Rolling Stone, and many, many other great publications. And you've had professorships at Pacific University, Leipzig University in Germany, and Columbia University, and many others. And I don't want to speak much longer. I just do want to thank the teams of the Goethe-Institut, the great staff of the library, and of the tech team here in the space who make this event possible, my team at 1014, and then also the team of the Thomas Mann House that is in LA, and that also made this event possible, because otherwise Alice wouldn't be here. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the mic and the floor to the two of you. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's always interesting to fly across the ocean and then have an event and then actually people showing up. Because so I'm very glad. I'm also not really surprised because we have the wonderful, the magnificent Morgan Jerkins with us. And I'm so glad we're doing this together.
Yes.
The last time Morgan and I saw each other was in 2019. I feel as though it was a very different time back then.
Yeah.
We had an event together in Berlin at Heimathafen in Neukölln. And that was the time your book, This Will Be My Undoing, was out for about a year.
Yep.
You were teaching in Leipzig. And my book just came out. I loved reading your book because I saw some parallels. Just the approach of having the black feminist perspective, but also the approach of looking at your life personally and seeing the political within it. But now it's 2023. We meet again after a pandemic, after after 2020 and the murder of George Floyd and the following Black Lives Matter movement gaining global attention. So much happened, and I would love to know how you look back at your book, This Will Be My Undoing, now, after these years, and how are you feeling in general?
Yeah, that's such a large question. Can everyone hear me well? Okay.
No, it's very hard to
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. That's a lot. Because it's because so I started my career in journalism a bit reluctantly, right? I graduated from college in 2014, and I could not get a job in publishing. They would always have these different descriptions like, oh, you need to see the 4-year degree, you need to love literature. That's not all you needed, because I did have those things. I did the unpaid internships because at that time, before we had conversations about labor and all that, my career services person told me you had to do unpaid internships in order to get a $35,000 job. And I went back home. So I graduated, I went back home, and that summer was the summer that Michael Brown's body was left in the street for hours. And I remember being online, and it was just tweets proliferating with that image of him in the street. Like, when are they going to cover his body? When are they going to dignify him? You know? So what was happening in journalism at that time is there was an upheaval, because a lot of white editors were looking around their newsrooms and like, we need people to write about what's happening with these protests. And when it comes to police brutality and the disproportionate amount of black people being killed by police. I say disproportionate because there are other races being killed by police, don't get me wrong, but disproportionately it affects black people. So that's where I came in. I was a freelancer for a few years and accruing bylines and establishing more portfolio. And that's what This Will Be My Undoing came out of, because initially I wanted to write fiction. That was my first love. I went to a master's program for fiction, but my agent was saying to me, do nonfiction first, because that's where I was getting my name. This was by writing in nonfiction. So my book came out in 2018. And then I came to Germany in 2019, which was like the opportunity of a lifetime to go there. But I had no idea. I think none of us had any idea what was about to happen next. So for 10 weeks, I taught at Leipzig, which was like, I don't want to romanticize it too much, but it was amazing. I had enough time to meet my students. I had enough time to write. I had enough time to think. I really understood what a work-life balance meant as a person of letters and in the academy. That's how the program was constructed, for me to have time to have a break, which I didn't think was going to happen coming from America. We could talk a little bit more about that. And then 2020 rolled around, and when people say the world shut down, it really shut down. I was living in New York at the time. I was literally 1 block away from Central Park. I could see Central Park from my office. And for 6 weeks, I would say, I heard not even a dog bark.
Wow.
The walls of my apartment where I lived, they were very thin. I couldn't even hear my neighbors next door. My neighbors had children. There was a 70-something-year-old black woman that lived right next to me. And I always knew when she was home, because when the elevator doors opened, I would just be ambushed with the most exquisite smells of like her cooking. I couldn't smell anything for weeks. I couldn't hear her for weeks. And the only thing I could hear at a certain hour, probably right around this time right now, was the blaring sounds of sirens. That's it. So I'm inside, I'm working from home, and I worked for a all woman of color led publication at the time, and now we were separated. And I lived by myself, and I didn't have a dog. And my mom was calling me every day, like, you need to come home. And I couldn't go home because she was over 50, and I was exposed to COVID at the time, but I didn't get it, but I didn't know. So I had to stay in this environment, and then New York became the epicenter of the virus. And because I was working in journalism, I couldn't turn off. People kept saying, turn off your, cut away from what, the internet. I couldn't. I had to do that for my work. So imagine Twitter and TikToks of nurses, particularly black nurses and black moms, crying because they can't find formula because everybody took all the formula at their nearest grocery store. Or the black nurses who were like, I can't even go home to my family anymore. Other nurses that are like, I can't go back to my family anymore because I feel like I'm going to infect everybody there. Like, it's something that even to this day, when I come back home from Jersey, see my mother in Jersey, and the bus that I take, sometimes if I take the bus, we go past the Javits Center. Every time we go past the Javits Center, like, I just feel like a twinge in my stomach because I remember that the Javits Center was a makeshift hospital. That was at the time where the ICU beds were filling up. We didn't know if we had enough. We didn't know if we had enough, period. And it was just a really, really scary time. And I think what was so hard about that moment is that we could have done a lot better. Like, our safety nets could have done a lot better for us, and so many bottoms fell out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially in that time, I think it revealed how it is very important who is in office, who is in charge, who is making these decisions, and it was about it was very unfortunate to see who had to be in charge of that,
and who gets discarded, right?
Yes.
Because I think the hard part about the pandemic was that you couldn't talk to your parents about it. You couldn't talk to your grandparents about it. My 2-3 generations of my family, they'd never seen anything like this. So they were going through it as well. But even in New York, like, you really saw the haves and the have-nots and the matrices of oppression. What I mean by matrices, it's not just a matter of whether you're black, you're this, whether you're white, it's this. It's whether you're black and you have a certain socioeconomic level that can allow you to flee the city while everybody else is dealing with it. You know what I mean? Whether you have a certain income, whether you have a social network to rely on. And that doesn't just cut across race and color all the time. So, I mean, I remember I have a author friend of mine who said that he had a neighbor who was a woman of color. She was a Latinx woman. I don't know if she was black or not, or mestiza, but she worked for a well-to-do family in New York, and they wanted her to come in at the height of the pandemic to fix a button.
Wow.
This was before we knew about wearing masks all the time. Before, like, this was like April 2020 to fix a button.
Yeah.
And I think about that story all the time because I'm like, who are the people that gets discarded easily when stuff hits the fan? I don't want to say the S word because I don't know if I can curse. But like stuff hits the fan. The elderly, those who are already disabled, those who are low income. So a lot of service workers, they were the ones that are getting sick. And a lot of those service workers were people of color.
Yeah, especially in public transportation, you could see that. But you could also see that with who's cleaning buildings, who's cleaning the streets, who are the nurses, who are also teachers who have to, especially like in elementary school and kindergarten. So I also think that after that people sometimes feel a little bit like astonished in a way of how did the Black Lives Matter protests in the midst of the pandemic gained so much attention, but it was precisely because it unraveled so much.
Oh my God.
And because it was very evidential that the core experience of discrimination, of marginalization is that you are suffering social economically, that at the end of the day it boils down to poverty and who is disproportionately affected by poverty.
So another thing, so talking about the matrices of oppression, right? Just because I'm a Black woman does not mean I am in the same proximity of violence or state violence as another Black person. What I mean by that is this: I am Black, I'm light-skinned, I went to an Ivy League university. I grew up middle class. My proximity to state violence would not be the same as someone who is darker skinned, or someone that lives in a neighborhood that's more surveilled, lower income. It's not the same, right? So I just want to say that before I go into Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. I have never seen anything like that in my life. Like, I know I'm only 30. But I've never seen anything like that in my life, because when the George Floyd video was dispersed, and I didn't watch it, I don't need to see that. It does nothing for me to watch it. I know, I just report it. I don't need to see it. But when I saw Minneapolis, excuse me, that's when I was like, this is about to go. But I didn't expect it to really just propagate across the entire world. Like, not only, it was like a thing where, I'll tell you a little bit about my schedule, right? If I have a long night when something happens, I usually go to sleep around 1 o'clock, and then I'll wake up around 7. I'll say, okay, I have like an hour or two before the news starts coming in again, video starts coming in again. That did not happen during the protest. It was like I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning. The stress, I only could get 4 hours of sleep. I wake up at 7, videos just coming. And it was like, you're seeing white kids in Nebraska being tear gassed. You're seeing all white Black Lives Matter protests like in Utah. You're seeing Maori people in New Zealand doing the haka for George Floyd. Like, I'd never seen anything like that in my life. And I think about how we could have gotten sick. Everybody could have gotten sick. Like, these protests, everybody was close together. And to have that much of a determination to go out there for other people's lives when your own life is at risk, not just because of the police, but because of a virus. I mean, again, still processing it. I still think about the videos I saw. I still think about the photos I've seen. I still think about the warnings. I think about the fact that in New York we had an 8 p.m. curfew, and the police were just block to block. You could just see the sirens and the noise level too. And then because I could go on about it, but it's like, every 4th of July, around the 4th of July, you get fireworks, and it could be really annoying, right? It could be like 3 or 4 days, or sometimes weeks. I hate it, right? But the type of noise that I would hear in my living room at that time, it didn't feel like real fireworks. It felt like I was in the middle of a war zone. It was like I would be on the phone with someone and I'd have to go to another room because I could not hear my friend that was on the phone because of this loud booming noise. So not only did I feel destabilized because I was not in my regular work environment and I was living by myself, isolated from everyone, but I also felt destabilized because of the noise. To this day, I've never heard noise like that before. It just felt like something was going to come right through my window and shatter everything.
But to point it back, I think, yeah, you very vividly describe or take us back to how it was in 2020. How did it... Do you look back at your book that came out about This Will Be My Undoing? Do you look at it differently, or did it change your perspective? Do you think it's read differently now in this time?
Yeah. Well, I think the hard part is that I wish I could look up at that book and say that things have changed.
Yeah.
You know, like, I think about, there was an anecdote that I wrote in my book about, I moved to New York in the summer of 2015. Which feels like eons ago, but it was a really great time. I've always wanted to be in New York. Typical, stereotypical story. I'm from Jersey, and I wanted to be a writer, and I moved to New York. And I remember that summer there was a huge police tower right near 125th, which is like near the main thoroughfare of Harlem, and you couldn't see inside it. The windows were black, so you never could see if anybody was even in there. And I was walking home one night, and there was a black man that was harassing me. And it was like he was getting really belligerent because of something he was trying to sell me. And I just went home because I was, and the police tower was right there. And there was a part of me that was like, should I go and tell them that this man is harassing me? It's like, I can't do that to myself, because if they assault this man, I'm not going to be able to live with that. And someone might be able to say, well, he could have assaulted you. I didn't care. I'll go home and I'll lick my wounds in private. I'm not going to take that chance, right? But now in Harlem, it's not a matter of police towers. You'll just see 10 police in underground for no reason. Just 10 to 12 police officers. What are they doing? Oh, because we got to make sure that no one's jumping the turnstiles. So it's just like, it's a huge hyper police state that we have, that I feel it more viscerally than just a single tower. It's just like I'm just walking anywhere, and it's just like, why is it so? Why you just walk? Like, it could be scary.
Do you think it's gotten worse even?
Oh yeah. We keep giving money.
Yeah.
To, like, the way that I think about it, right, is, again, during the pandemic, a lot of the bottom fell out, right? So for those who may have been struggling with addiction and substance abuse issues or housing insecurity, the bottom fell out. So a lot of those people are still reeling, and I see it on my morning commute, like, still dealing with substance abuse issues. And it's like, why do we keep giving billions to the NYPD, whose money rivals GDP in some small countries in Europe, but you're not helping the people that I see every single day right here, right? Why are you not helping them? You know, or even like recreation centers, you know, more after school activities, especially for the kids. Imagine, like, as an adult, I can't imagine what the kids went through, not be able to see their friends, just doing all this stuff through Zoom. Like, where's all the services for the kids? So I think in a lot of ways it has gotten worse. And even just on an intimate level, I feel like I still feel this energy of, like, a lot of people are still reeling from what happened, because we all lost something, you know, during the pandemic.
Can you, the things that you just described, in what way are these also especially Black feminist issues and questions?
Oh man, how could it not be?
I think it's kind of like a question that I already know the answer to, but I want you to explain it.
Yeah, because it's like, I'm gonna think about it from a medical perspective, right? There is so much documented medical racism against Black women, whether it's our pain is not to be believed, right? If you tell a doctor, like I'm feeling a certain type of way, they may not believe you. And I can use 2 examples from centuries apart. The first one is Serena Williams, when she had to get some tests done because of her white blood cell count or something before she gave birth to her daughter. A couple of nurses didn't believe her. And when they finally did the test, they were like, she could have dropped dead at that moment. Her and her child could have been dead. And then centuries back, we think about the beginning of modern gynecology. J. Marion Sims, he experimented on black women without anesthesia. Yeah. And that's why we have the instruments and tools that we have today. So this idea of like, you are stronger than most, you could take it. I think about the fact that there was an article that just came out yesterday, right, about childbirth. And it said, it does not matter how wealthy a black woman is. I can't get the statistic right, man, so you have to look it up. But it's like, black women, irrespective of class, their children are about 9 times more likely to die.
I think it's 4.
Excuse me, thank you.
4 times I think women are more likely to die during birth. Black women are 4 times more likely, and the child is, I think, 3 times more likely, or 2 times,
Yeah, way more times than it should be. So when I think about like with COVID and the pandemic, and I think about how does that relate to black feminism, because this has been talked about in black feminist circles all the time. If black women are free, then we all get free. And it's this constant reminder of that we are all we have. It is about the collective. And that's what black feminism means to me. Because the pandemic especially made me tie back to those ideals or those values, because we really saw in real time how individualism messes us up. It isn't just a matter of, if you got sick, it's your fault. What is the care that is involved that is going to rehabilitate you afterwards? And what if that care is not there? Like, we really are all we have.
Yeah. I also find it very interesting of how in the last 3 years, all of this has been, it's come to the surface. It's like a magnifying glass. All of the pandemic kind of served like a magnifying glass for all these social, structural injustices. But, and there was so much, discourse about, or people are trying to get these things across, that at the end of the day, social justice is looking into medical justice, into infrastructure, into a lot of stuff. But especially in Germany, and I think it's parallel to the US, the discourse about social justice has been kind of like instrumentalized and torn in this way of critical race theory and identity politics, that it has been portrayed, misused, characterized as something that talking about these issues, talking about black identity, black female identity is something that is attention-seeking and selfish and just very self-involved and hyper-individualistic, that you just want, you just want to like be special in a way, or get attention or something. That is things that have been said about my work, for example, in Germany, and I kind of see this parallel in these dynamics also in the US. So how did that affect you, or does it affect you in any way?
Yeah, it affects me because it's like, everybody is not a critical race theorist. Critical race theory is an actual discipline. It is a scholarship. And that is not me. That's not Alice. Like, if you want a critical race theorist, you look up Kimberly Crenshaw. You want a critical race theorist, you look up Derek Bell. Just because we talk about black female identity does not mean we're scholars in that particular discipline. There are scholars who actually study this. So that's the part that makes me upset, pisses me off. It pisses me off because it's like, just because someone is centering Black experiences does not mean that they aren't academic. That actually disgraces the people that spend decades doing this particular kind of work. It minimizes their scholarship, and it's a blanket statement. And that's the part that I don't like, is that even in mainstream, we still don't make space for kaleidoscopic Black experiences. My Black experience is not your Black experience. It's because we're Black. I grew up in Jersey, you grew up in Germany. Like, it was not gonna be the same. And so because we Black people, a lot of Black people, they're like, we're not a monolith. And it's like, we have to keep saying that because the media thinks that anytime we open our mouths, it's the same thing. It's the same scope. And there's not enough room for the in-between. And that's the part that really bothers me, despite the fact, other than the fact that books are being banned on things that have nothing to do with critical race theory. I'm talking about picture books about Harriet Tubman.
Toni Morrison. Like, yeah, the bluest color is
I'm like, but these are, first, Toni Morrison is a canonical writer, not just for Black people, period. Mm-hmm. And the fact that and she's the first Black woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, like the fact that you're trying to make sure that the next generation doesn't even know she exists, like, and Harriet Tubman is an historical figure. You know what I mean? And it's not just the fact that, you know, she was responsible for, you know, transporting enslaved people to freedom. But it's like, this woman was also, in terms of militaristic acumen, very, very smart in terms of knowing about nature and knowing how to make specific bird calls, you know, and learning how to masquerade and learning about herbalism, like all these different overlapping systems of knowledge that she knew. You're trying to wipe away all of that. So that's the part that really upsets me. Think about the kids.
Yeah, but people people instrumentalizing kids and children, thinking that it would be too much for them to learn about these things. From a German perspective, these book bans and this discussion about history being too harsh on the children is kind of wild, because in Germany, of course, you can't, like, I don't know, imagine people say, oh, we shouldn't talk about Germany's past because it's like too much. That wouldn't.
You see my face? Sorry, I have a really expressive face. I'm just like, but like, so what age? At what age do you learn about Germany's past? Like, what do you remember? What age you were?
I remember being not even in school and learning about it. I also learning about this being scary, really scary. But same thing about Black history, about learning about slavery and learning about my Black American ancestry. I know that from even before I went to school, we talked about this, and it was scary to me. But it doesn't mean that you should be deprived of learning about these things.
And not only that, but it's like, Black American history isn't just slavery either, right? You can talk about Reconstruction, right, where there were all these Freedmen's Bureau were teaching those how to read and to reach out to their loved ones post-enslavement. You could talk about the Harlem Renaissance. You could talk about the emergence of jazz and the blues. Like, there are all these different things you could talk about. It doesn't just have to be enslavement, Obama. Where is all of the different developments in there? What? You know, that's the part that I'm like, if you start with this, what else are they gonna? It's like a domino effect. What else are they gonna be like? No, we don't want them learning about this because it ties into, well, you know, during jazz, like, it was considered the devil's music. It was considered like a Black person thing, and it's still influenced by what was going on during the time. But it's like, what else is going to be next?
Yeah, I think, first of all, you've written about that, about the past, Black American past, through a very personal lens in your second book, Wandering Through Strange Lands. And it's, just tell us a little bit more about that.
I mean, so I grew up in Jersey. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, a very ecstatic Pentecostal church. My grandfather was a bishop. And I knew that my family's story did not start in Jersey, but I just didn't know where to begin. None of my family members really talked about what made us migrate from the South. And so I did a cross-country trip to the South, across the Midwest and the West, to sort of bridge the gap between those who fled during what was called the Great Migration, which is a huge exodus of black people that left from like 1910, 1970 from the South to the other parts of the U.S. Bridge the gap between those who fled and those who remained, and the ramifications of that. It was a hell of a ride, pun intended. I learned a lot. I didn't realize that, you know, my dad's family was originally Louisiana Creoles, and they weren't always enslaved. Mm-hmm. They actually owned people at a certain time. I was never taught this history. I never knew. I thought all black people in America were enslaved until emancipation. That's not true. There were black people who did own slaves themselves. There were black people who were free before 1865. We don't know that. I wasn't taught that at all, right? I wasn't taught that on what is known as the Trail of Tears, when President Andrew Johnson forced 5 tribes of the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, Seminole, and the Creek across the Mississippi into Indian Territory, which is known as Oklahoma. Those 5 tribes, they were slave-holding nations, and black people accompanied them to Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. And it is those same descendants of those black people that came that are fighting for rights within the tribe because they're considered free, meaning they have no Indian blood, even though their people intermarried and all of that. So same thing keeps happening. I didn't know any of these things. I wasn't taught that.
I think there's still a lot of things that we don't know, and I think it's also interesting to how reluctant societies are, I'm talking about Germany and about the US here, to complexify their history and their past. Black women, of course, play a crucial role in this because it was the perspective of black women that was not told. It was, it has been erased, and now that black women are taken up upon themselves to tell history throughout their perspective, looking at it differently, it stirs up a lot of things. Talking about the 1619 Project, for example, as a very famous example. But I also find it very, very telling that history is such a battlefield when the future is so uncertain. I think that is very connected with each other.
So when I was doing Wandering in Strange Lands, if you see me stand up, I'm very short. I'm very unimposing, which in a way it worked out for me to get the interviews that I got because I was just coming by myself with just my rental car, my recorder, and a pen and paper. But it was scary a lot of times when I was driving around doing this field work by myself, particularly in Oklahoma. And, you know, I would go back to my hotel room and I would upload the files, and I literally thought, I was like, nobody's going to believe me. Like, nobody's going to believe me. Oh, even if I have photos and I have videos and I have transcripts, nobody's going to believe what I just saw. And it goes back to that. I'm like, because I've seen so many times from black women, even those who don't even identify as feminists, when they start speaking up and they center themselves, it's always someone that tries to minimalize their experience, that tries to gaslight them. And I was like, I'm worried that no one's going to believe what I have to say. And, you know, with regards to the 1619 Project, like, I was there when Nicole Hannah-Jones had a reception at the New York Times building right when it was released, you know? And I think what the hard thing about the 1619 Project is, of course, and don't get me wrong, it's not just a black and white issue. There have also been black academics that have been, you know, had some criticism about it too. But the part that bothered me was just like, when I read it, I said, she's talking about the history of bondage with black people in this country, which we know is an historical fact. And I was like, I don't know what's making people so upset about it.
That is because there's no, of course you can debate about it, you can criticize it, that's not the issue, but like having it like causing such an uproar and a stir, that was very disproportional, I think.
I think also it's like, I think this idea of like reparations.
Yeah.
But that didn't start with her though, because remember in 2014, Ta-Nehisi Coates had the case of reparations, case for reparations, right? I had a scholar at Rice University in Texas. His name is W. Caleb McDaniel, and he won the Pulitzer Prize for The Sweet Taste of Victory. I'm so sorry, Professor McDaniel. But he wrote but I remember I sat across him, and he went to Johns Hopkins for his PhD. He literally said, he's like, the amount of free labor that enslaved black people had done for this country it actually exceeds the amount of money that was spent, railroads, any of the modern infrastructure that you see, it exceeds that. Like, you can't even fathom it. And I remember when I was writing my next book, it's a novel and it begins in slavery, and I was like, I'm trying to capture the time, I'm trying to capture not only the labor, but the punishment that was involved. I literally had another scholar who said to me, anything that you can think of that might have happened during slavery, I guarantee, I can almost be certain it happened. It's like, I'm not going to try to quantify it, I'm just going to let you know like it probably did.
Yeah. We are almost at the end of our discussion, but I want to ask you this at the end, is what are you grappling with now? What are you interested in now as a writer? I know you you wrote fiction, you published fiction, your latest book was a novel. So what is next for you? Well,
I mean, I'm not writing this, but I mean, I'm writing my next novel. But I'm so interested in artificial intelligence and how it relates to identity, because I have seen some shit, I have seen some shit online that have scared me. Like, I mean, in terms of people would have these Polaroid party photos and they would be like, none of the people in these photos are real. Or they will have a video of a famous actor talking, and then the next video will be of him saying something completely different, and they'll be like, that one is not even real, but it's the same gestures. You cannot tell that it's fake. I couldn't tell. I don't have a trained eye in AI or anything like that. So I'm really interested in that, because if you can start creating people through the internet and you can start manipulating people's likeness, where you can make them say things they didn't say and potentially do things they've never done, what does that say for not just the public in general, but also black and brown bodies who are the most surveilled already? Like, what does that say for us? Yeah,
that is a very, very interesting question. You say you're not going to write about it, but maybe. I don't
know, you know why? Because it freaks me out.
Yeah.
Like, it freaks me out because it's like, I think that kind of boils down to the question of like identity in general. Like, who are you really?
Identity and reality also.
Yeah, and on the internet, you could be whoever you want to be. But if you add in AI and you're making whole people,
I know.
It's like, with voices and everything, it's just like.
Yeah, that would be a whole nother talk. But we are unfortunately at the end of this talk. But it is time for questions, if anyone has any. We would love to hear them and to answer them.
And we have another 15 minutes, so it would be great to keep them here for these 15 minutes. But we do need your questions for that. I'm trying to also see if we have any in the chat.
Oh,
Okay, I don't see any hands, but in that case,
I got more 15 minutes.
Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, for sure.
Because I have more questions.
Okay. Go for it.
Since we are already talking about writing and non-fictional writing, and also like the extension of that, I would love to know how you feel, or what, now that you've written non-fictional writing and fictional writing, especially when it comes to discourse about identity, blackness, feminist discourses, is there something that fiction can do and can go to certain places that nonfiction can't? What are the different qualities for you in writing about this?
I love this question. So I'm writing fiction now because the real world is too much. I'm like, I can't go into that space right now. Well, what I say is when it comes to fiction and when it comes to writing about Black experiences, like the novel I'm working on now, right? The novel I'm working on now is called Zeal. And the premise of it is you have two enslaved Black people in Mississippi who are lovers, and they get separated at the brink of the Civil War. And we follow the trajectories that their respective families take until we reach modern-day Harlem, where you have this other couple who don't realize their centuries-long history with each other because they're ancestors. And so I did fiction for this because I don't know what it's like to be a Black man in the United States colored troops in the summer of 1865, coming back to Natchez, Mississippi for his beloved, who has already been transported to another Confederate stronghold in Shreveport, Louisiana at the same time. I don't know what that's like. So it was a lot of research. It was a lot of thinking about genealogy. How could someone maintain a connection? What type of heirlooms, what type of things would be able to pass down, oral histories that I can fictionalize? And also, you know, I'm a sap. Like, I love reading about love. And I think about the fact that there have been so many ways in history that have broken up Black families. And to have the ability to love in spite of that and have the ability to connect, I think, is extraordinary for me. So fiction allows me to go into that space where I can talk about the hardship of a particular day and imagine what it is like, while also having some breathing room for optimism at the same time. I didn't want to just write a book with like bogged down, well, this is what happened in Reconstruction. Like, no, let it be a little bit more fluid, infuse it with more emotion, infuse it with more, you know, motives and hard decisions that change people's lives.
Yeah, so you can be more romantic in fiction?
I want to be romantic right now. The second book was really hard. It took a lot out of me, just a lot of data and learning about how families got separated and even how they came together. The first book I had, you know, This Will Be My Undoing, I published it at 25 years old. It was a lot. It was almost like an exorcism of sorts of things that I was talking about. My last book, called Baby, was about, you know, magical realism. So I was getting there. But when I finally finished that, I came across a letter in the Schomburg. It's in Harlem. It's considered one of the biggest institutions, or I think the biggest institution for things of the diaspora. And I saw a handwritten letter from an enslaved Black man to his wife on another plantation. He didn't write it himself. It was intermediary. It was in February of 1861.
Wow.
And it was a 4-page letter, and it was donated by a family. And in the letter, he says, you know, my master wants me to forget about you and marry someone else, but I want you to know that I've not forgotten about you. And when I read that letter, I was like, yep, I want to do this. That was just extraordinary for me.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. I also think it is a very good time to grapple with love and romance, because an interesting time in a way, because I feel like people are going two ways in my perception right now, because there are people who are in the constant deconstruction of everything, and I feel like especially in Germany, a lot of people write about love, non-fictional books about love, and kind of like saying, what is it even, and it's not even a thing, and maybe it's not even real, kind of like how nothing is real. And then other people kind of like going in the other direction, kind of, making more space again for romance and everything, which I also find very interesting.
And because I started my career, and I know we gotta go, so I started my career of people, a few people tried to, put me just like a trauma writer. Like, I'm just a Black trauma writer. I just regurgitate Black trauma on the page, right? And it is true that I wrote a lot about Black trauma, but it's like, that's not all who I am. I'm in a different space than I am than when I wrote This Will Be My Undoing. I have to honor that space that I was in then and honor the space that I'm in now. And, you know, again, like thinking about with romance when it comes to black people in a time where they weren't even considered human, black people in a time where their movements were restricted to even see each other. You know what I'm saying? Like, that to me is what I want to explore. That to me is like, in spite of all odds, ... As cheesy as that sounds, that's the space I want to exist in, because if it wasn't for that space, we wouldn't be here. So I feel like it's the time to do that for me.
Yeah, I love that.
I was just gesturing because we do have one question. Do you want to read it?
Sure. Someone online, this is a question for Alice, asking what was the impact of the George Floyd protests, Black Lives Movement in Germany, if you've seen a change there.
Yeah, definitely. It was. I think it's a very interesting. Okay, let me try to summarize because a lot happened. So in 2019, we saw a series of racist, right-wing terrorist attack. There was a politician being murdered. There was an attack on a synagogue in Halle. And in February 19th, 2020, 10 people were murdered in Hanau as a racist attack. So there was a lot, it was a time full of tension, but then all these dire conversations that needed to happen that were like all results from 2015 when a lot of refugees came, and how the rising of the right-wing party, AfD, all of that culminating in the years 2019, 2020, and then because people kind of, I think, that's why I wrote this book, that's why the conversation about racism kind of like started to gain more attention even before 2020, is because people saw that the rise of hate speech and the rise of a right-wing party in Germany had consequences, and we saw this in these years especially. But then the pandemic came, and it was kind of this conversation that needed to happen very badly, kind of got derailed, and people had to talk about other things now. So then May came, and George Floyd's murder was publicly discussed, released. The Black Lives Matter movement in the US gained traction again, and I think it was a mixture of the impact that also Black pop culture has on the young people in Germany, the combination of like people also having this feeling of injustices being very present, and it's like a magnifying glass, of course, and what happened before that, these racist attacks not really being discussed properly, action was not really taken, that George Floyd was this moment where a lot of people felt that they had to go and show solidarity, and also use this as a moment to start again a conversation about racism in Germany. It was, in hindsight, I would say, a lot of this moved a lot. I've never seen anything like this in Germany either. There were tens of thousands of people on the streets in Berlin and Frankfurt, Cologne, Munich. The protests were huge. And it was very interesting that Black Germans were taking the lead on the conversation about racism. For a lot of people, because Black Germans are not by any means the biggest minority, so a lot of people were also a little bit irritated. They were saying that is not a German problem, this is an American problem. A huge part of that conversation in Germany was about the US, because I feel like Germans also like to use the discourse about racism and anti-Black racism, especially in the US, to kind of like talk about racism, but not to talk about racism in Germany. So that is kind of like also a very tricky thing to navigate, being in the discourse, and kind of like, yeah. So that was kind of interesting how Germany positioned themselves, and there were, and I feel like what sadly didn't happen, or that didn't happen enough, is that we didn't get to talk the way we need to about police brutality in Germany, since it doesn't look exactly like it does in the States. There are different things happening, but it is very real. Racial profiling is very real. We have an unsolved case of a black man being murdered in 2005. Uri Jallo is his name, who was found dead and burned in a police cell in Dessau. There are we saw the emerging of right-wing chat groups being exposed during these times within the police. We saw that we had a case that a lawyer, she's a woman of color, was threatened by a right-wing group that was traced back to the police. So there are a lot of things still on the table and unsolved, and I feel like that this is that it was interesting that there was this willingness to talk about police brutality in the States, in Germany during that time, but not really making that next step. On the other hand, I also don't want to be too say, oh, we didn't really, but I also have to say that, and also, what we in Germany and especially in Europe, Black Lives Matter also means the refugees' life matter, because a lot of black people who are coming to Germany are coming as refugees. What is happening on the European borders, and also with the laws of refugee asylum laws in Germany, is devastating. And also that are topics that that needed more solidarity. And I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement didn't really, it's not their fault, but it's like, it didn't, like the public discourse didn't really make these connections. They tend to still look at issues that are particular, the realities of black people in America. So I think in a way it moved a lot. It centered racism in a way in Germany that I've never seen before, but it failed to make this discourse about specific German issues, and that I think is very unfortunate. Okay, that was a long answer, but yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we are at the end of this conversation. And any question that is there, please raise it during a drink and a snack. I hope you can stay with us for another few minutes. Thank you very much. We could listen to you for another hour. Unfortunately, we don't have the time, but we will read about it. So thank you for coming. Thank you for coming out. And
thank you for doing